Before
we're looking after the individual claimants, the cohort of people who luckily haven't yet had to claim, but will one day say, I hope there's some law to protect me, and trying to do our bit in the justice system. We only have our one little niche. We don't foray into criminal law or family law, or, we believe in being specialist.
Hi, I'm Belden Mankis. Welcome to The Purposeful Strategist, the podcast that shifts the conversation about purpose and strategy from what organizations should do to what business leaders actually are doing and what they've learned along the way. My guest today is James Maxey, founder and chief executive officer of Express Solicitors, one of the UK's leading independent specialist personal injury firms. Since founding the business in 2000, James has grown Express from a small startup practice into a nationally recognized firm representing thousands of clients each year across complex and often life-changing cases. James' career spans more than 2 decades in personal injury law. As both a practicing solicitor and a business builder, he has overseen significant organic growth, strategic acquisitions, and the development of an award-winning training program, all while navigating the regulatory and commercial pressures shaping the modern legal market. James, welcome to The Purposeful Strategist.
Hi, Belden. Thanks for having me.
No, really looking forward to our conversation. If I've got it right, you've grown from about a startup in 2000 to a pretty big independent personal injury firm. Could you give us a picture of the firm today? Scale, type of cases you work on, the range of clients you represent?
Absolutely, yeah, happy to. So the UK personal injury market is quite fragmented because there are about 11,000 solicitors firms, attorneys firms in the UK. And about 5,000 of them do some kind of claimant personal injury, so for the claimant side. The defendant side is very organized because the insurers have panel law firms and there are 4 or 5 big ones doing the vast majority of the work. So it's quite an unusual marketplace. Sometimes they call us a cottage industry because of the number of, obviously there are some quite small firms within that 5,000. So anyway, we started literally, one-man band, 22 clients that followed me from a previous firm where I trained. Scale of things now, we are the biggest in the UK in terms of number of clients, turnover, number of personal injury lawyers and specialists. According to Trustpilot, happy reviews and all, whichever measure you use, we can now confidently say we're the biggest, and we've only perhaps recently been able to be clear that we are the biggest, but been one of the biggest over the last few years. And so that feels like 45,000 individual clients, claims going on at any given time, 903 employees, they tell me. I checked today. It does change. And turnover this year that we're in will probably, for our group, we have a group of companies that all provide the service to the injured claimant. Probably we're 14% ahead of our budget, so doing a bit of interpolating, might turn over 130 million, 125 million as a group this year. Might do EBITDA or something like 30 if we keep up our little bit of performance above plan at the moment. So we're doing, the last few years, it's almost got easier as we've got bigger, strangely. Yeah. I don't know if that gives you a flavour.
No, it absolutely does. I'm quite struck by the EBITDA number, and maybe we might come back to that because that sounds like a very healthy, robust kind of return. Just curious a little bit. You talked about the group.
Yeah.
Is that just sort of, it's kind of ways of organizing people mostly doing the same sorts of work? Or is it, no, we have a group that does this bit of it, we have a group that does that bit of it?
Yeah, well, both things, because within the law firm, the main operational bit, Express Solicitors, there are definitely departments. So lawyers who do what we call employers' liability accidents, workplace accidents.
Right.
Lawyers who do clinical negligence, lawyers who do road accidents, etc., etc. So lots of different divisions, some of them big and small, doing the individual pieces of work, and then some support groups. So we have lawyers who do nothing but the legal costs within the law firm. We also have, as you know, in the UK, it's a split legal profession. There are barristers and solicitors. Barristers typically self-employed at the private bar who do a bit like consultants and general practitioners for doctors. Barristers do the, some say the brainier pieces of work. I'm not sure that's totally right, but they do the court hearings and the detailed advice, and they might be quite specialist in one niche area. We're unusual because we're accredited by the Bar Council to train and have barristers, and we have quite a big group of barristers, including the trainee ones, about 20 odd, 25 within us. So most of our work goes to our own barristers. So the law firm is organized like that. But when I said group, I really meant the sort of 4 companies that make up the main bit of the group. So we have what you might call lead generator, if you were talking in business speak, a company called Injury Lawyers for You, which advertises to the public to see if they've had an accident, because we're a direct business to consumer business. And we don't go through panels or arrangements with insurers or others to get the work. So we control that business. We have the law firm that processes the claims. We have a medical agency or an expert agency, because it does a bit more than medicals, but primarily arranges the medical reports, also arranges rehabilitation and treatment for injured claimants, would arrange other reports, forensic accountants, specialist engineers to prove elements of a claim, and also has nurses, 7 nurses on the books who paginate and analyze medical records, help both the lawyers and the medical legal experts get more quickly to the nub of the issues. The 4th business we have is an after the event litigation insurance business. So what that is once you've had your accident, if it is that you need a no-win, no-fee lawyer in England and Wales, you probably also need insurance, because the lawyer can waive his fees if you lose, but he can't really afford to waive your disbursements, things like your court fees, your medical reports. And there may be times when you need to pay the other side's costs. The cost rules are pretty complicated, but basically we have the litigation thing, and that means the client really gets no win, no fee, because obviously if they lose, not only does the lawyer not charge them, but they get precisely 0, and they are guaranteed to get precisely, should they lose. Obviously we're hoping they win. And the insurance would even cover the eventuality where they were made an offer by the other side, and then they didn't beat that offer at court, and then their money was eaten into because they should have, in retrospect, taken the better offer that the other side made. We call them Part 36 offers, but they're formal offers to settle cases, to avoid too many cases going to court. And we insure that client's risk so that they can trust us when we say, no, hey, we can get you £50,000, not £15,000 for your injury. We'd like to reject that £15,000 offer. Well, if we're wrong, we make sure they get their level of compensation without losing it through the insurance.
And if I've got it right, you work entirely or almost entirely for the claimants, for individuals, for people like you and me who, for whatever reason, something's happened that shouldn't have, and they want to bring a claim.
100%. Personally wouldn't want to do defendant work as well. There's no bar on doing it. Some firms do a bit of each. You'll find barristers that do a bit of each and say that it gives them a sort of perspective from the other side of the fence. It's not really a moral position. I think I was suited to that type of work, and I like the individual clients. I'm not sure I could be the guy that says, hey, you don't need that sort of dressing for your burns injuries. You can have the cheaper one. That was never me.
Right.
I was always the I'm going to get you the better treatment, Mrs. Smith, and I'm going to look after you, and I'm going to make the insurers pay.
I think sometimes personal injury lawyers, they bizarrely get a bad rap, ambulance chasers, whatever. And yet a different way of looking at it is you're on the side of the little guy. You're that big insurance companies or employers or whoever, they can afford to have a panel, to have lawyers hot and cold on tap. What's your take on that? Do you have any insight as to why that happens even?
You've put your finger right on something that, I used to joke about it because I got fairly thick skin. You're in business, you're making a living, you're doing your job. They're calling you an ambulance chaser, ho, ho, ho. It has kind of worn on me over the years because I always explain it to people like this. Nobody ever has a problem justifying the seriously injured client. Somebody is injured through negligence at birth and has terrible cerebral palsy, and they're in a terrible position where they need round-the-clock care. They can't see. They're doubly incontinent. It's a massive injury. People would say that person should get £20 million because they will need carers. They will need an adapted house. And you go through the injuries and people who get smashed up in a car accident, break a couple of legs. Oh yeah, well that's quite serious. They should get compensation also. And I kind of say to people, where do you draw the line? The guy on his push bike is knocked off. Maybe he doesn't spend any nights in hospital, but he has cuts and bruises, maybe a whiplash injury to his neck, maybe his bicycle is a nice one and is £5,000 to fix. He misses a couple of appointments with his work and some extra overtime. Does he need compensation? Where is the level drawn? One thing we have been very, very careful to do at Express Solicitors, and there's been a move to this, the opposite move to this in the industry over the last 10 years or so because of legal cost changes, is we've refused to abandon the sort of, can I call it standard injury, for want of choosing I think all injuries are serious, but the mid-range of injuries. We've refused to stop representing people, and we've developed an effective model that the client pays us some of the money. It's not free, and the insurer pays us some of the money, but we have developed a model which gives a service to those people and still lets those people in the middle get compensation. We advertise, of course we advertise, we accept we advertise, but people ring us. We don't cold call them to see if they want to make a claim. They have had an accident. It's a distress purchase to them. They don't want to have had an accident, and the whole process they'd rather not be going through. We've done a lot of analysis recently, and we've actually produced quite a detailed report on kind of the value we add to society, because obviously within getting the individual compensation, we are saving the NHS from providing lots of rehab, because we will typically get that done privately at the cost of the insurer, insuring the party who caused the accident. So we're getting people back to work. And when you measure in QALYs, this measurement of sort of improved quality of life, we're contributing very substantially to taking the drain away from the NHS and others. And of course, there's a wider social purpose to personal injury lawyers, which is often ignored, which is if you didn't have, let's call it health and safety, and I know people make jokes about that as well, or systems, effectively insurers saying to factories, you better be safer because you had a couple of accidents last year and that was expensive. If you didn't have that regulatory financial push of somebody watching over to make sure the standards are enforced, then of course you would have more accidents and injuries going on. So we see ourselves as part of the system, the societal system that is part of the checks and balances, and of course the insurers try and paint us in a very one-sided we're taking money away from them view. We campaign as well in our arena. We've suffered from a great number of effectively legal changes against us over the last 10 years. Sort of 2014 was a seminal year where there was an act of parliament called, it's a bit long-winded, this Legal Aid Sentencing and Punishment of Offenders Act. You'd think it was something about the criminal law, but there were bits in there relating to civil compensation. In principle, that was where the insurers persuaded the parliamentarians to take away recoverability of the success fee that goes with no-win cases, and also the after-the-event insurance used to be paid by the losing insurer, or the tort fees of the person who caused the accident through their insurers. And they flipped those back onto the claimant side of the table for payment. And the reason for that was they wanted to reduce claims, and not just the cost of claims, but they wanted to reduce the number. We're looking after the individual claimants, the cohort of people who luckily haven't yet had to claim, but will one day say, I hope there's some law to protect me, and trying to do our bit in the justice system. We only have our one little niche. We don't foray into criminal law or family law. Or, we believe in being specialist.
Now, just focusing on you for a minute, you founded the firm reasonably early in your career, rather than sort of staying on a traditional partnership track. So what motivated you to build something, to, do that? And then what did you see in the market that led you to think there's an opportunity here or a need that maybe others didn't?
Well, can I be shallow enough to just frankly admit that I was driven by economics. I felt, having trained, I didn't know what I wanted to do at school. I perhaps fell into law because I'm not very good at maths, and I suddenly wasn't going to be an accountant or something. And I was a good arguer, so I think people thought I might be a lawyer before I did. People around me, mentative so and so, perhaps as a child. So I fell into the law, and look, I actually don't have very good academics. I've got a third-class law degree, would you believe? I think I'm the only person running a very big firm who can claim that. I'm not sure. if those stats are published. But I'm not recommending it to the kids today. And I
Right.
tell my
Don't do what I did.
it was harder for me that way, and I was lucky to get a job as a trainee solicitor. I applied to every firm with more than one partner in the northwest and northeast of England. And I only got 2 interviews and only 1 offer, so I wasn't choosing the firm. But I got on okay training in a firm with 16 offices around Manchester that did a range of things, but was starting to specialise in personal injury. And the profession at that time was doing that because a lot of areas of legal aid were being restricted and closed down. And personal injury was still a sort of profitable area of high street law, as they call it. So we're not talking about the corporate law firms here who are doing something completely different. So I just realised during the training that they probably would have made me a partner at some point. I don't know, but it seemed relatively doable to me to establish a firm and build it. I mean, I wish I'd known more, because back then the things you don't know, I'd obviously tried to borrow more money and start bigger. That's the big thing I'd have tried to do, because it takes a heck of a lot of time in the wilderness finishing your first 20, 30, 40, 50 cases before you can ever convince a bank that you're serious to lend against your stock than rather the value of your own home. But anyway, I did think I would make more starting. And to be honest, the fallback was, if it doesn't work, well, you go and work for some other guy, So that was really my decision. Firms in the high street in the UK over that time, perhaps I was early to spot it, have moved away from the traditional model of the younger people will buy it off the older ones. That was a typical sort of a model. Part of the retirement of the older partners would be selling out their share. The bank would give a partnership loan, and the whole thing would roll on. 2 or 3 lawyers on the high street, over a period of time could sell out. So lots of things were happening to change that. There was a widening gap really between, I think, the owners of the law firms and the employees. I think more people were wanting to be salaried lawyers, and not have partnership ambitions. The number of lawyers was increasing rapidly. When I started, there was 62,000 solicitors. I think there's 200,000 now, or maybe 180,000 in the UK, and the population's gone up maybe 5 million during that time, only the whole population. And the corporate model was coming. There was a lot of legal change. It was in 2007, but it took a while to bed in and for all the regulations to land and be made. Back in the early 2000s, the rules were you could not be a limited company. You had to be a sole trader or a pure partnership. If you went bust, you lost your practicing certificate, sort of pretty much definitely. So that was that. There were actually limits on the number of partners. I think 20 partners was the limit in a firm back then. There were restrictions on how you advertised. It was seen as, I think, ungentlemanly to overly advertise your services. And lots of those things were changed. There was a Clementi report, and there was an Act of Parliament, all driven at the perception that if bigger industrial money and non-lawyer ownership came to law firms, the bigger firms might be able to offer perhaps better economy of scale and therefore maybe better service to claimants, or to clients generally across all the legal sectors. I'm talking about injury claimants, but this came to all areas of law and solicitors. That meant firms were quite quickly getting bigger, and your average salaried solicitor was perhaps getting left behind for buying in as an owner or partner at that point. And obviously now here we are with private equity hoovering, almost coming full circle.
So just so I understand a bit of that growth story, and you've mentioned private equity, where's Express Solicitors in that whole mix?
Well, we built the firm as a limited company. We kept the ownership very tight. In fact, up until October of last year, I was 90% owner of the thing. There's one other chap down Slade, our CEO legal, was 10% owner. So quite traditional, 2 lawyers, 2 solicitors owning the thing and keeping ownership tight. Had a lot of senior people working with us, all well remunerated, and mission packages and all the rest. But ultimately, the equity kept quite tight. That kind of worked, as I say. People were happy to work in that environment in our area of law. Don't forget, in some of the other areas of law, corporate, you might have rainmaking partners who bring in the clients. We bring in the clients by spending 14 million quid a year on the internet and advertising. Let's not mistake where our clients come from. It is a continual, never-ending process of pay-per-click, search engine optimization, PR. So we have a machine that delivers clients. I'm not belittling the lawyers, but our lawyers work 100% of the time on legal work representing claimants. Most of them prefer that and would hate the idea of going networking every evening to drum up extra clients.
Fairly recently, you've moved from being 90-10 owners to bringing in some private equity money. What was the thinking behind that? Why did you feel that was the next logical step?
So October last, and obviously we were working up to that for a couple of years.
Sure.
We sold 3/4 of the business to UCP, a Swiss private equity firm that has a base in London. The logic for that was a whole load of things. Bluntly, taking some money off the table, although I've had a good living running Express Solicitors, I've only had this one job ever, and I've never had a moment where I withdrew kind of capital. I paid myself during the time, and I've had an okay living and brought up a family. But there was the starting of realizing value for the thing that I and others had built. There was some succession planning, and although I don't want to get too morbid, and I hope I've got many years left on this planet and some years yet still working, I'm 56 now. I wanted to start the process early because I realized we could have had an abort and a failure and gone around the loop for 2 or 3 years doing this. And we started looking 3 years ago at, we looked at AIM, we looked at possible trade sale. We couldn't achieve a trade sale because we were too big, literally. Couldn't find a suitor, small sector. And we looked at PE because they were broadly, I know there are employee ownership trusts and 1 or 2 other things, but broadly speaking, we felt there were 3 possible routes. Listing, which was quite a long job, lots of rules, lots of costs. Not all legal businesses that have listed have done that well in the UK. I think the UK stock market and AIM has had its ups and downs in the last few years compared to other stock markets. I learned a lot about it through meeting nomads and brokers for that process, and so it's quite educational. But we settled in the end on equity. And, a lot of that is about securing the firm's future. I do want to retire at some point, not too soon. I do want to hand over to the other people who've helped build this business who are younger than I am and should get their go at the top. If I did go under a bus, God forbid, I'd have left a terrible mess for my poor wife and family. There'd be some kind of disaster or fire sale. At some point, there has to be a handover of the reins. So it was for all that. It was succession planning. Obviously, I didn't want my retirement to be making 900 people redundant and closing the door. That would have been a good idea. And I'm very keen to see the business go forwards. And if even after I'm gone, it carries on growing successfully, I'll be very, very happy about that. What I would say about that is that their plan, UCP's plan, looks like ours. Our business plan was keep growing, get scale, carry on. There's a big marketplace. There's a long runway to grow into here. We're the biggest, but we've probably got 3 or 4% of the marketplace, right? There are lots of firms there's a lot of choice for claimants who are injured out there. And so we wanted to see it grow. We had a credit facility of about £12 million. We now have perhaps access to 50 million. So we'll be doing it more of what we're doing. And the process of buy and build is what UCP do. And that's what we've been doing over the last few years. Organic growth as well, and always funneling more money into organic routes, injury lawyers for you and the like, but also buying up other law firms, frankly, to get their work and to get their people.
I did want to talk a bit about strategy, and it feels to me like you've already covered probably a fair amount of it. Grow, acquire, but is there anything that might not be in, I love very simple, everybody can understand it kind of strategies. And it sounds like you've sort of got one of those, but I just wonder if there's anything more that we haven't touched on. And then I'd also love to explore, how does it come together? If I were in the room where the strategy was actually being pulled together, what would I see going on?
Yeah, the strategy is to carry on growing. We have to keep the quality in and the wheels on. And so it's almost like going up a staircase. You grow a bit, you've got a lot of training and integration to do, and there's the hard yards. So that's broadly the strategy. But I think the clever things, if I can put it that way, that we've done over the years that have made us be reasonably successful in the marketplace compared to our peers. We've very much been goats, not sheep, when legal changes have come. I think some lawyers, it's perhaps in the psyche of a lawyer that when the law is changed, they work out immediately how to comply with that law. Now, I don't work out how to break laws, let's just be clear. But I do look at it as a skeptical lawyer and say, what are they doing with this new set of rules? And how can we best operate in this new legislative environment to favour our clients and ourselves as a business. And there's a great symbiosis between clients with no win, no fee lawyers. I mean, if the client gets more compensation, I get paid more legal fees. There's no conflict there. We're aligned, the clients and I, very, very clearly. So what we've done is coped with all those changes I alluded to earlier very well. So, the government, I think, thought when they changed the fees in 2004, the lawyers would have to offer more paralegals and less qualified solicitors and strip down the service to do it more cheaply. And we frankly needed that level of income because we don't make a stellar margin. We're not kind of Google or something or some kind of .com thing that grows at a massive rate. We're quite a slow and steady business. And in fact, the money is locked up on our business for a number of years until you win the injury case. Is incredibly cash consumptive, expanding a personal injury business. So when those changes came, we looked very, very carefully at that legislation. We had already been insourcing things, but any piece of work that gets done that we can avoid sending out to another business, we do. So virtually nothing leaks out from our umbrella. So the expert reporting, agency work, the barristers, the cost lawyers. And we get better quality of service, by the way, by having them all on the same computer platform, talking to each other and understanding what each other are doing. So obviously when they're debating the cost recovery, our cost lawyers understand our retainer with our clients and the insurance product and the interplay between all that and the medical agency really, really well, and are able to therefore do a good deal for everyone on recovering the legal fees, because at the end of all of these cases, the insurers have an argument about the fees. We don't just send an invoice and get paid. So there is a sort of final stage, which is collecting the money. So we developed the in-housing of everything yet further as the law changed. We developed, to be honest, a fairly innovative retainer where we charge the clients a little bit more than our competitors. I'm completely honest about that. I've always thought that it's a dumb idea to have everyone in an industry charging exactly the same. And this is where I've often taken issue with regulators who have sort of suggested to me that best service for consumers is cheapest. I spend my entire life, and I think most people, if you think about that, would think, oh, he's got a point here, But honestly, regulators think the other way. There's something in them, and I've come across, there's a lot of legal service regulators, too many, you might say, in the legal sector in the UK, intermeddling. They could perhaps talk to each other, but we decided I describe it in opticians terms as, there are Specsavers and they might do a pair of glasses for, I don't know, £50. And there's Dolland and Edgkinson on the high street who are a bit more bespoke and you get a bit more personalised service, and you may choose to buy nicer frames and aesthetically more pleasing specs or whatever, but they may be a few £100s. And I think that's totally right, that consumers should have choice. They should have very clear explanation of fees. We like to think if we're charging more that we also on average get them more compensation, because in a personal injury case, it's all very well winning the case and bringing the client some compensation. Mr. Bloggs, I've got you £1,000 compensation here. Well, what is Mr. Bloggs' case worth? Should he have perhaps had £5,000? That's where the rigor around training comes in. I feel as though if we're going to be more expensive, we need to deliver more service, and therefore we need to make more effort to be at the top of our game. And I think they must have choice. What would frighten me to death is if the government came out and said, and they've been close to it in the legal services arena, in financial services mis-selling claims, which we do very little of, we're nearly all personal injury, they have capped fees. I can't remember, 25%, including VAT. And all that does is it drives the businesses to give less service for the capped fee. And I'm really worried about that happening in such a complex area as personal injury, where the individual lawyer's skill matters. And we can see that because when we buy other firms, I think you have an example in a firm we bought recently, motorcycle accident, they were advising the lady to take £1 million, quite a serious motorcycle accident as a pillion passenger. And my lawyer got her £3 million about 3 months after we took over the case.
There's a couple of things I want to come back around on, but if you can, help me understand how that strategy sort of got developed and how it gets evolved. Is it, you get together with a few other people once a year and talk about it, or once every 5 years, or is there some other process that goes on?
As you might imagine, it's changed over the life of the business. I mean, to give you an idea of how the growth accelerates in later years of a business, or how it seems to from our point of view, we were perhaps 600 clients back in 2014. So we've been running 14 years from, 22 clients to 2,500. Now we're knocking on the doors of 50,000. You kind of get to a tipping point where it gets, I think, easier. So throughout the life of the firm, it's been very different because obviously there was a time when we didn't have a
Sure.
board, we didn't have a chief human resources person, and we didn't have a chartered accountant who was a CFO. We've now
Hmm.
got what would look like a board to any other business, and had that in place for some time. And of course, that was another thing through going through the limited company structure. We were able to bring in non-legal specialists, treat them as well as the lawyers, remunerate them as well as the lawyers, and understand there were other skills beyond lawyering that were important. So the process of kind of keeping up and developing, I mean, there are so many threads to that. To fast forward to now, we have a weekly scrum meeting with key people, but it's only about 5 people: our non-exec chair, head of computer operations, the head of legal, myself, and the finance guy, and a chief compliance guy. So there's quite a narrow team doing day to day there.
Mm.
Obviously, operationally, there are loads of department heads and structure delivering the legal services. We do have a well developed set of developers for the Proclaim case management computer system that we run the cases on. And we do have a well-developed program of, filtering through the requests for improvements, deciding on what's going to go ahead and project mapping them. And, a lot of our development is broadly IT, and obviously there's a lot going on with AI at the moment. And, we're about to make some very big spending decisions. We're very, very close to doing, a lot with AI. We can't fit in time-wise continual meetings with all the lawyers. There is a full fee earners meeting once a month, but it's more of a communication out to them because of the sheer numbers now. But there are lots of routes to get information back up from the teams, and there are ways of people proposing improvement. But broadly speaking, that small board looks at the legal change that's coming and follows the plan. Some of the things that we've most successfully done is saying no to things. Throughout our entire life as a business, people have said, well, what about expanding into other areas of law? And we've done a bit of it. I mean, I myself was probably a road accident specialist doing credit hire and road accident cases when I
Hmm.
started. So obviously we've spanned out quite a bit to cover every area of injury, from clinical negligence to industrial disease to deafness. There's lots of different subsets of injury. So we do the whole spectrum of accidents. We do some other claimant finance mis-selling and other type work,
Hmm.
housing disrepair work. It's similar type of claims work. We haven't gone wholesale into that, mostly because we're very busy doing the personal injury, and there's such a long pathway ahead for us to do more of that. So I think sticking to our knitting and the bringing in the peripheral services to that knitting, so the things that go with it I've described before, that is where I think we've done better than trying to be a divorce lawyer one day, a criminal lawyer another day,
Mm.
and convey your house the next day. There are areas of law like conveyancing that look a bit like our business because they follow a sort of automated pattern. There's quite a bit of automation in personal injury in the way it's done, although the different accident types mean that you're actually working on a lot of flowcharts.
And a couple things I take out of that. One is you sort of have a few big overarching strategic thoughts. Grow, broadly stick to our knitting, aim for quality, at a reasonable price, not you're not trying to gold plate things. And then it sounds like within that, you've got a very small group that sort of senses when there's a decision that needs to be made or an issue arising, and kind of you can jump on it fairly quickly without having some long, cumbersome process to get there.
I mean, there is the risk with that system of maybe not hearing a voice from somewhere within the firm. And I remember, not so many years back being able to take all the partners away to a conference and hear from them and take on
Hmm.
topics that they gave me for development and really good ideas, and then spend the next 6 months actioning the work they had given me. And it does feel like perhaps one of the costs of being bigger is that we can't do that so much anymore because we can't afford to steer the tiller one way and then the next way the next day. We have to. Maybe it is more of an oil tanker than a speedboat now. I don't know. I'd like it to be a speedboat, perhaps. There's a bit of scale to it, and you can't
Mm.
just react to every point. But we absolutely have touch points with partners, and we do have away days where we hear from them, and we think
Hmm.
we've got a friendly enough environment that people can make their suggestions and so on. But you're right, it
Yeah.
does come down to quite a small group deciding.
You said I was going to ask you about your training programs, and I am, it sounds like it's a key part of your strategy. Just be interested to see, is there anything particularly different about the way you approach trainee training in general? Or would you say no, it's just we know it's important and we do it?
Let me try and give you the best answer to that because there's so much in there. There's only two ways to get the lawyers. You can get them out of the colleges of law and the law schools and train them up in-house, or you can get, a lateral hire from somewhere else, which sometimes we get by acquiring the whole firm. But, same thing. Now, I don't want to say one is better than the other because obviously we've got a mix of both going on. And clearly when you're growing fast, you can't only do it from trainee solicitor people because, of course, it takes a few years for them to become seasoned warriors. But if we were tending to one direction or another, it would be the train our own type direction. It has just worked best for us over the years. There's a lot of cost in going to recruitment agencies and getting laterals. I think one of our traits for success is we work pretty hard, which means we're pretty demanding. So we have higher annual hourly rate hour targets than our competitor firms, certainly in the regions in the UK. Our targets would look like London or even American type targets, So it's not unusual for our lawyers to have 1,800 or 2,000 hour targets when they're experienced and qualified and they've worked their way up. We give them a lot of support, paralegals, secretarials, PA support, IT support, to let them get that work done efficiently. So we're asking a lot of them. That is perhaps one of the issues when a lateral comes across. There is frankly a step change in amount of work. We got a lot of process in what we do because we find that if you measure stuff and write it down and have it in a process, strangely it gets done and it gets done consistently and you avoid defects. We're very keen. I mean, I'm sure there's waste and rework everywhere, but we try to iron out waste and rework in our processes. That's what we're trying to do. So we do love the training them type process. And as we've alluded to before, we feel as though we are saying to our clients we're better than average. And so we want to do kind of 3 times the volume and quality of training everyone else does. I think it's a false economy. I mean, the real cost of training is the time that they're in a training session, because paying for the people to do the training is one cost. But actually, these people, as soon as they're anything other than the very most baby level, they're also billing some money for me. So I'm taking them out of a day's billing at a cost of a couple of £1,000, even if they're junior, and putting them into a training session. I can see the pressures why other firms do less of it. We also have, which is a bit different, some of the bigger firms have something similar. We have a in-house academy. So 3 times a year, we bring a large cohort of people who've usually completed the legal practice course at one of the colleges of law or universities. Bring them in a block, 45, 50 of them, that sort of number. We have a whole floor in one of our office buildings dedicated to nothing but training. It sits empty in the off months, but for 2.5 months, it's active doing a cohort. And so they do sit in a classroom setting before they're released into the wild, into one of the work units. And they're not just chucked in with a manual to read and you start in the road accident department tomorrow, Sarah. They get that induction process from some very experienced lawyers. But I think that is much better than the bad old days when I started and it was, here are your clients, make sure you can bumble through. And maybe you want to phone one of your friends in another law firm to find a precedent or something, how to solve that problem. I mean, I guess maybe we developed a good skill in bumbling through, and maybe we were in court in front of judges sooner in the old days, and all of that was a good, tough training. But looking at it from a more scientific, modern way, I've got large cohorts of people to get up to speed quickly, and it's a sound investment to give them 2.5 months. Then they will go on and do a sort of paralegal stage, and then as they progress, they will become file handlers in their own right and trainee solicitors and qualifiers. I'd like to think when we've got a solicitor qualified, and I think, there's some empirical measurement we've done around this, that they kind of have the skills of a typical 1 or 2 year qualified solicitor at the point of qualification. And we can see that from the amount of work they've done, cases they've processed. We also are very careful when we give them cases, not just to give people brand new cases where they will go through only the same steps on all of their 20 cases. So they will get perhaps a case from somebody who's left the firm that is halfway through, so that we can watch them learn across the whole piece. Basically we need to suss out within a year or so whether they're the success story or not. We do ultimately, if people fail, we do ultimately manage them out. I'm not shy of saying that. That would be a last resort.
James, this has been fantastic. But it feels like a real sort of condensed masterclass in a whole bunch of things. People leadership, brand positioning, business models, just really a lot. So I want to thank you for sharing all that with us. We've only got like a very short bit of time, but if there was one quick thing that you'd really like to make sure you share with our listeners, what would it be?
Oh, look, if they're thinking of getting into business of any sort, do it. It's much better on that side of the fence than before you leap. Just do it. Life will turn out okay. My brother was kind enough to lend me 37,500. I got 112.5 from the bank, and off I went. Crazy looking back. Yeah. So do it, I would say to anybody who's interested in business, rather than think about it. And if you do it, what are the key things for people doing it? Get the wrong people off the bus. Don't let toxic people drag you back. Don't work with people who won't make a decision or take a risk, a calculated risk, I mean. Get rid of those people, move away from them. We've had moments where we've changed the composition of the people we're working with, and it's always been for the best. And then just turn up every day and work away. It won't all be the numbers going up every day and no challenge, but each problem broken down can be solved. I think I've made 3 points, not one, Belden.
That's okay. That's value. Thank you, James. Really appreciate you joining us. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And you've been very kind, and I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Purposeful Strategist. In addition to being available on our website, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, please do follow us and leave us a 5-star review. It helps others find the podcast. Thanks again, and join us soon for the next episode of The Purposeful Strategist.